If regulators engage industry, there's a conflict of interest. If you mandate a product that has been in the market for 50 or 100 years to go through bioequivalent studies, what you're indicating to the manufacturer is, great, thank you so much for another session, another conversation that we're having. Today I'm going to focus more on reflections on a couple of engagements that I've gone to, and specifically this first video I'm going to talk about a convention that I attended in South Africa, Joburg, in April. So United States Pharmacopoeia is a standard setting body that actually works in establishing standards for pharmaceutical products, impurities and related, to ensure that they set the reference standard for manufacturers, but also for quality testing for regulators and national quality control labs. So they convened this engagement in line with their ongoing work across the continent, and that work has been more of how do we enable regulators to safeguard quality and access to products in the market, but also then support their commercial angle where they're bringing new testing reference standards for use by manufacturers, for use by quality control labs and all that. So when that is happening, the key thing, and I would look at it from a point of where the ICH, International Council on Harmonization of Regulations for Pharmaceutical Products for Human Use, started from a point of acknowledging that one entity cannot do everything by itself, but if we bring different stakeholders to have conversations, shape perspectives, and most importantly, drive us to the next level, we are in a better position meeting the needs of our public, but also safeguarding the interests of those who might not be able to advocate for themselves. So when the USP convention happened in South Africa, Joburg, we had African Medicines Agency in room, we have the regulators from different countries, national quality control labs, regional economic communities, and most importantly, industry players in the room to first of all participate in the conversation to shape where things are moving, and on the other end, to define what good would look like for us as an industry. In that conversation, I would say number one standard is that when we're looking at regulatory system strengthening, because African Medicines Agency came with the commitment to support growth of the industry, but by ensuring regulatory oversight, and it becomes our continental regulatory agency. It will set standards, it will foster capability building across member states to ensure that each of the regulators have this capacity, and on the other end, coordinate regulatory review and evaluation of different functions that need to be done at the continental level, especially in emergency situations as we are looking at them. So with that understanding, when we go to the conversations, it was more of understanding what are the development, what experience do different regulators have in post-market surveillance, quality control testing, standard setting and reference access and all that. In that conversation, you'd establish that we have a situation where regulators have a problem they are contending with in terms of regulating their markets. Industry has a problem, especially the formalized industry, where you have, I would say, structured either legitimate importers and traders of products, legitimate manufacturers. They have a problem because when, and would say, substandard, falsified and poor quality products are introduced into the market, it makes a risk on the quality of the product that they're having. And worst of all, it even gets worse when there's somebody who is actually counterfeiting their own product. So the industry has a challenge. That is a shared challenge on both sides. But none of them has conversation to say, how do we support you and how do you support us to meet that obligation to ensure that that system works for all of us. So that was one of the conversations that we had, and you realize that there's a possibility for us to collaborate more. Subsequently, when we got to the subsequent conversation was around how do we see the developments in the continent being an enabler for the national regulatory authorities to move from regulating products when the submissions are made to managing even the quality, and that is where national quality control labs come in. Unfortunately, across the continent, we do not have as many mature quality control labs, and on that account, then it means we are exposed at one point, especially in the post-market surveillance component. Why do I say that? Most regulatory authorities will tell you at the point of registering your product to submit samples which will be visually inspected, but also quality tested from a quality reference lab. But the risk in medicines do not happen during the regulatory registration step. Most quality issues arise in the post-market when the product has been registered, and therefore now it is commercial supply, because at that time there's a perception that there's not as much regulatory oversight, and therefore you just distribute your product to the market. No customer has a testing facility to test products quality in their own house or in their kitchen. So then it becomes an easy win. So which means sampling during that period needs to be critical in the post-market surveillance phase, but that has not been as robust as it should be. Regulators must be able to support that, and I'm glad that some of the National Quality Control Lab officials who are in the room were more open to say we need to test more, and in testing more we need standards, and the standards must be validated. And one key thing that also came up was that validated method development becomes a challenge for some of our industry players, and therefore there's room to support in process validation. Because unless the process for quality testing is validated, even with the best reference standard in the world, you will never be able to meet the quality standard of what you aspire for, or prove that you do have meet that quality standard. That becomes a pain point. One thing that I would say is still kind of a challenge, and I would encourage that from that conversation and that engagement for us to move towards more, is being more collaborating and being more open to acknowledge that industry is in the room, not as an opponent, but as a partner. The perception and the notion has always been, if regulators engage industry, there's a conflict of interest. There could be a conflict of interest if the regulator is acting in a way that actually negates their obligation to safeguard the public. But then industry is also part of the public, because industry, when coming as a company, I'm a corporate citizen in the country where I'm operating, and I have a right to be served by the regulator, and the regulator is the representation of the government of the day. So the question is, what controls do we have in place to guarantee that that relationship happens in a way that is supporting the industry, but also in a way that enables the regulator to perform their function? That skepticism, that perception is still a problem that we need to understand as a content, and most importantly, work to address so that we collaborate more rather than looking at it from a conflict of interest. And another piece that I'll think about when I think about this is that if I'm regulated and I don't contribute to help the regulator understand my pain point and my challenges, and also what my experiences are, their regulations will never align with my needs. Which means probably I'll give them to regulate one aspect, which is what they are focusing on, but not the wholesomeness. Quality is built into the product. And if quality is built into the product, into the system, if a component of it is missed out on, that is a lost opportunity. And I'll bring a case example of a conversation that I had with some of my friends from the regulatory authorities, and this was with regard to bioequivalence studies that are being called for across the region in most of the countries. I do understand the principle of bioequivalence. The product must prove that once administered to the patient, it meets the threshold in terms of a quantity in blood circulation that is capable of treating the patient. Because if you take a medicine that does not treat you, it is poison or it's just waste. And that waste is actually a cause for distrust in our public health system. So bioequivalence has a value and has an importance. But the question we need to ask ourselves is, what product should we take through bioequivalence testing, and what would be the criteria and the evaluation protocol for it? And in this conversation, one thing that we're asking is, you mandate a manufacturer to have their products taken for bioequivalence testing. Fantastic, provided they fall in the class 2 and class 4, where we're looking at it in terms of low solubility products, which means unless they dissolve, they can't be absorbed, and therefore they cannot be effective in the patient. Good enough. But what if this is a product that has been in use for the last 50 years? Which means there is actually proven clinical evidence that the product, in the dosage formulation that it has been designed in the manner in which it has been administered for the last 50 years, it has been treating the patient as per the indications, and therefore it is pharmaceutical equivalent, and pharmaceutical equivalence comes from bioequivalence. So by virtue of inference, you can already infer that the bioequivalence standards are already met. If you mandate a product that has been in the market for 50 or 100 years to go through bioequivalence studies, what you're indicating to the manufacturer is you need to go do clinical studies. Clinical studies need protocol development. That is an extra cost. And the unfortunate part, and that is where I look at it, is some of these products are not as commercially viable at the moment, because the technologies have evolved, advances has been made, and therefore there's a pain point. So when you mandate that for a product to go through bioequivalence studies, and it's been in practice with use for long, and the cost of doing the bioequivalence studies might be prohibitive, the easier decision for the manufacturers to say is, I was waiting for a trigger to stop manufacturing this product and continue with what I want to get into the next frontier. which means they stop producing it. If they stop and this is a critical product that we need for life-saving conditions, we are impeding on access. But we're impeding access not because we need to, we're impeding access because we are not able to respond to the realities of the market, but also the principle behind why we do certain things. Testing is critical for quality purposes and to guarantee safety and products, but the principle behind it is there a mechanism that has actually proven the quality, has proven the efficacy, has proven the criticality in terms of the different profiles of what we are looking at in the product? If there are mechanisms that have proven that, we don't need to go through the testing, especially for mature product brands. Otherwise, we will be impeding on access. Those are some of the conversation that we were having in the meeting. And another thing that came out clearly, and unfortunately from the engagement we didn't look at it as much, but it is an understanding that regulation is an end-to-end process. From the product design, from the product development, through the clinical phases, through the testing in the product manufacturing facility once the quality standards are met, to production and actually supplying the market. Being an end-to-end process, we need to be able to have all the players across the ecosystem in the room when conversations are happening. Unfortunately, we are in a situation where each of us in our different silos talk in our own account, and when we talk in our corners, we only know what we know, but we never have the chance to get to learn from somebody on another level. And one thing, there's a video that I watched online, and I would encourage some of you guys to watch as well as you watch this video, is the fact that good ideas come from cross-pollination. I learned something from a banking sector, I learned something in the retail industry, I learned something from construction, and then each of those pieces of information, grounded on my technical training as a pharmacist, gives me a different perspective. That different perspective is the source of innovation, because then you are putting disjointed pieces of information and technical realities into context to deliver a solution that transforms how something is done. But if we stay in our own corners, in quality control, in regulatory science, in pharmacovigilance, in manufacturing, without talking to each other, we will never solve the problems of the industry. We stay as industry, the regulators stay as regulators, we will never transform the industry. Local manufacturers talk in their circle, importers talk in their circle, innovators talk in their circle. The generic manufacturer is processing something from the innovator. So how can they talk together to actually facilitate and catalyze development of the industry? Those are conversations that we need to have. By being part of the USP Annual Convention, I'm honored that I had access to some of these conversations, but I'm also keen on challenging us. How do we get to the next frontier? How do we catalyze more of such conversations? And most importantly, how do you as an individual be part of this journey, part of this conversation? Because if you're part of it, chances are the pain points you see in your domain, the pain points you see in your corner will become a reality in the industry. More people will know about it. More people will add their voices to it. And when they add their voices, either they're giving you a solution or they're helping you look for a better solution. Or maybe just telling you whatever you are fighting for is not worth fighting for, pivot to something else. That is actually resources saved. And I think that is the journey we need to be part of. And that was the foundation when we started off African Pharmaceutical Network in 2021. Let us bring people together. Let us have these conversations. Because when we do, the conversations unlock possibilities, and we believe that we live in a world of possibilities. Those possibilities are only realizable when we make the best of what we have, and the best of what we have is each of us with our own capabilities and at our best level, working with the betterment of our society. If you enjoyed the conversation, subscribe to the channel, share it with some of your colleagues and friends. Let's make it go to as many people as possible. Thank you and have a good one.